In today's full step-by-step sewing tutorial, we're stitching up a pair of shorts that perfectly blend classic style with playful vintage charm. These are the Seamwork Effie shorts. With their high-waisted A-line silhouette and curved design lines, these shorts feel like a stylish nod to the 1940s, and yet they're timeless. I'm using a beautiful burgundy twill from mytextilefabric.com. It gives this design just the right amount of structure and richness. This is a skill-packed project and we'll be covering plenty of techniques along the way, from sewing darts and pockets to inserting a zipper, adding belt loops, creating hem facings, and even making buttonholes. Whether you're building your sewing confidence or just looking for a fresh, polished summer piece to add to your handmade wardrobe, you're in the right place. Let's get started. I've applied fusible interfacing to the wrong side of my left waistband, right waistband, and fly piece. And I've also transferred the markings onto the interfacing from the pattern pieces. Place the left and right waistband pieces right sides together and pin in place along the side seam. Repeat for the corresponding outer waistband pieces. Sew these seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. Finish the outer curved edge of your fly piece in your preferred method. Place your fly and your corresponding front piece right sides together and pin in place. Sew from the top to the dot transferred from the pattern piece with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, backstitch to secure. We're going to clip into the seam allowance from the outer edge to the dot, careful not to clip through the stitches. Then we can grade this seam allowance, trimming the interfaced portion a little bit more than the main fabric to grade the seam. Note that we're not trimming any of the material below the dot. Fold your fly piece to the inside of the front pant along the main seam and give it a good press. For the opposite front short piece, we're going to snip into the seam allowance just as we did for the other side. Snipping in from the raw edge just enough so that we have enough clearance to serge this upper portion. Now that we've created a separation between the top and bottom of this crotch curve, we'll finish this top portion above the dot. Place the left and right front short pieces right sides together. Pin together from the dot to the bottom of the rise. Sew from the dot to the bottom of the rise with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, finish that same stitched section, then press that seam toward the wearer's left-hand side. Now from the front of the shorts, we're going to edge stitch this seam that we created when we pressed the fly to the inside of the pant. Edge stitching along that pressed edge from the top to the dot, backstitching to secure. Fold the fly guard piece in half, wrong sides together. Finish the raw edges together along the side and bottom. With the right side of the zipper facing you, place it on top of the fly guard piece. Aligning the side of the zipper with the finished edge that we just created. Pin in place so that the top zipper stop is a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge of the fly guard. Baste in place with a zipper foot and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Across from your fly, fold back that finished opposite edge to the wrong side by 3/8 inch. And give it a good press. Place the fly guard and the zipper behind this newly folded edge so that the top raw edges align and there's a 1/16 of a gap between the zipper teeth and the folded edge of the pant. Pin in place. Then we'll edge stitch along the folded edge of the fabric from the top to the dot, backstitching to secure. Open up your zipper, then turn these shorts to the wrong side. Fold the fly guard out of the way of the zipper and pin in place. Then fold the left front short piece underneath the right front short piece so that these materials don't get caught in the rest of our zipper sewing. Now we'll take the loose side of the zipper tape and place it onto the fly piece. Make sure that the zipper teeth align with the line that you transferred onto your fly piece at the beginning. Pin in place. Sew the zipper tape to the fly from the top to the bottom with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we can bring that left front short back behind the fly. Pin the left front short to the fly piece. Baste the fly to the left front short from the top to as close as you can get to the seam line, stitching right inside of our finishing stitches. On the front side, those basting stitches have created for us a stitching guide. We're going to sew just to the right of our basting stitches by about 1/8 of an inch from the top to the seam line, backstitching to secure. Remove your basting stitches. Unpin the fly guard and flip it into place flat over the fly piece. Pin in place on this side. From the front, we're going to sew a few bar tacks to secure this fly guard in place. We'll sew 1 bar tack where the curve of our fly top stitching begins to curve toward the center seam. Sew another bar tack at the bottom of our top stitching at the seam. We'll sew a 3rd bar tack at the bottom of our center fly top stitching. If your zipper is longer than it needs to be, like mine, you can sew yourself a new zipper stop where the zipper ends, then trim off the excess. Place your front lining pieces right sides together with the curved edges of the front short piece. Pin in place. Sew these seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Trim those seams and clip into the curves. Then we'll finish the raw edges together. Open out the pockets away from the short and over their seam allowances. And we're going to understitch the pockets, sewing the pockets to their seam allowance underneath with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for both pockets. Place the pocket facing pieces right sides together with the pocket linings. Pin in place along the outer edges. Sew the pocket facings and pocket linings together with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, from the top all the way to the side edge. Then finish those raw edges together. Pin the pockets to the side of the shorts along the side and top edges and baste in place. Here are the wrong sides of my back short pieces, and I'm going to pin my darts. Sew the darts from the top to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so you can tie them in knots. Once the darts are sewn, press them toward their respective rises. I've gone ahead and finished the side and bottom edges of the back pocket piece. Now I'm going to fold and press those finished edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. Now that the side and bottom edges are pressed to the wrong side, we'll also press the top edges to the wrong side, first by 1/4 of an inch, then once more by an additional 3/4 of an inch. Then we're going to edge stitch that bottom inner fold, sewing it in place from the right side. Transfer your pocket placement markings from your pattern piece onto the right side of your back short piece. Place the wrong side of the pocket onto the right side of the back shorts and pin in place along the side and bottom edges. Edge stitch in place along the side and bottom edges, then sew 2 bar tacks at the topmost corners to reinforce. Repeat to attach both back pockets. Place your back short pieces right sides together and pin along the rise. Sew this seam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together, then press that seam toward the wearer's left-hand side. For my back short piece, I've gone ahead and finished the side raw edges with my serger. And I've done the same for the front short piece, finishing those side raw edges. Now I'll place my front and back short pieces right sides together. And I'll pin the side seams. Sew the side seams from the top to the dots transferred from the pattern piece, backstitching to secure with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then we'll press those side seams open. At the bottom of the front and back short pieces, I've gone ahead and finished the raw edges for the inseam for the front and back separately. Now I'll place these pieces right sides together and pin. Sew straight across with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press that seam open. I've gone ahead and finished one long edge of my belt loop piece. I'm going to fold and press the unfinished edge to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. Then I'll fold and press the finished edge to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. Then we'll edge stitch along both long edges of the belt loop piece. Cut this belt loop piece into 5 equal pieces using your pattern piece as a guide. Along the curved edge of the inner left waistband, there's a small dot transferred from the pattern piece. Clip to the small dot. Then we'll press this bottom edge of the inner left waistband to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, all the way across. For the outer waistband piece on the right side of the fabric, I've transferred the belt loop markings. Now I'll place each of my belt loop pieces with the finished edges facing downward at each of the markings, aligning the raw edges, and pin in place. Baste each belt loop with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place the inner and outer waistband pieces right sides together. Pin along the outer edges from the dot around the curve to the outer edge of the right waistband. Now we'll sew from that dot around the curve to the outer edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to trim my seam allowance by about half, and around the curved edge I'm going to trim to about 1/8 of an inch. Turn your waistband right side out, poking out that curved edge, and give it a good press. Now that the waistband is turned right side out and pressed, I went ahead and clipped into the seam allowance, clipping to the dot for the uninterfaced waistband piece, just as we did for the interfaced waistband piece earlier. Place the outer waistband layer right sides together with the top of the pant. We're going to start our pinning at that opened out seam allowance that we clipped into, placing that at the finished edge of the left side of the shorts. Continue pinning all the way around. Once you've pinned all the way around, double check that your waistband extends beyond the fly piece by 3/8 of an inch. Then we can sew the outer layer of the waistband to the top of the pant with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that your belt loops are out of the way. Then we'll trim that seam allowance all the way around. For the seam allowances of the right waistband that are extending beyond the fly, we're going to place those waistband pieces right sides together. With the seam allowance of the outer waistband pressed up toward the waistband, and the pressed edge of the inner waistband still pressed in place, pin the short edge of the waistbands together. Sew that short edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance by half and also clip the top corner. Turn the entire waistband right side out and give it a good press. I've gone ahead and pinned those folded edges of the inner waistband in place so that the folded edge just covers the main waistband stitching line. And from the outside, we're going to edge stitch the entire waistband all the way around, making sure that our belt loops are still out of the way. Now to complete the belt loops, we're going to fold the raw edges to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. Then fold them downward along the top edge so that this new 3/8 inch fold sits right below the waistband seam. Edge stitch in place for each belt loop. Place your bottom facing pieces right sides together. Pin the side edges. On one side, you'll sew from the top to the dot transferred from the pattern piece backstitching to secure. On the opposite side, you'll sew the full seam, both sides of the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Press the seam allowances open. Then we'll finish the top edge all the way around. Place the facing right sides together with the bottom raw edge of the shorts. Pin in place all the way around, aligning the seams. Sew the facing in place with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. Start and stop your stitches at the dots that we sewed to for the main and facing fabric. Trim your seam allowance by about half. I'm going to understitch the facing by turning the facing down and over its seam allowance, then sewing the facing to the seam allowance underneath with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. Turn the facing to the inside of the shorts along the main seam line and pin in place all the way around. Now that my facing is pinned all the way around, I'm going to edge stitch close to my finishing stitches all the way around the bottom of the shorts. Repeat this process for both legs. I've marked my buttonhole and button placement onto my waistband. Now I'll sew my buttonholes in place. Open up the buttonholes, then sew your buttons in place on the opposite side of the waistband. And now the shorts are complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.